Welcome to IMDbios, a weekly, short-form, old Hollywood biography series featuring mini biographies of Golden Age stars written 100% by IMDb users. This series will serve as teaser bios for various Golden Age stars that will be featured on the long-form old Hollywood biography series in the future. It will also serve as a way for you to vote on who your favorite stars are and who you want to see featured in the long-form bios series. Please be sure to like and leave a comment on each IMDb bio. Tell me what you loved about it, what you want to see more of, and who you want to see featured next. The first 8 episodes of IMDbios will feature the most popular actresses of the Golden Age of Hollywood. After those are released, your votes in the comments will determine who I cover next. And now, let's begin. Please sit back, relax, grab some popcorn, and enjoy our feature presentation. Ava Lavinia Gardner was born on December 24, 1922, to Mary Elizabeth and Jonas Bailey Gardner in Grabtown, North Carolina. Her parents were poor tobacco sharecroppers, and Ava was the youngest of 7 children. While Ava and her siblings were still young, her family lost their property, and Ava's mother received an offer to work as a cook and housekeeper at a dormitory for teachers at the nearby Brogden School. The school included board for the family, and Ava's father continued sharecropping tobacco and supplemented the dwindling work with odd jobs at sawmills. In 1931, the teachers' school closed, forcing the family to finally give up on their property dreams and move to Newport News, Virginia, where Mary found work managing a boarding house for the city's many ship workers. While in Newport News, Ava's father Jonas became ill and died from bronchitis in 1938, when she was only 15 years old. After his death, the family moved to Rock Ridge near Wilson, North Carolina, where Mary ran another boarding house for teachers. Ava attended high school in Rock Ridge, and she graduated from there in 1939. She then attended secretarial classes at Atlantic Christian College in Wilson for about a year. Ava's career as an actress began while she was visiting her sister in New York City in the summer of 1940, when her brother-in-law, a professional photographer, offered to take her portrait as a gift for her mother. He was so pleased with the results that he displayed the finished product in the front window of his photography studio on Fifth Avenue. Barnard Duhan, a legal clerk at Loew's Theaters, spotted Gardner's portrait in her brother-in-law's studio. At the time, Duhan posed as a Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer talent scout to meet girls, using the fact that MGM was a subsidiary of Loew's. Duhan entered Ava's brother-in-law's studio and tried to get her number, but he was rebuffed by the receptionist. Duhan made the comment, "Somebody should send her info to MGM," and her brother-in-law did so immediately. Shortly after, Ava traveled to New York to be interviewed at MGM's New York office by Al Altman, head of MGM's New York talent department. With cameras rolling, he directed the 18-year-old to walk toward the camera, turn and walk away, then rearrange some flowers in a vase. He did not attempt to record her voice because her strong Southern accent made understanding her difficult for him. Louis B. Mayer, head of MGM, however, sent a telegram to Altman. "She can't sing, she can't act, she can't talk. She's terrific." She was offered a standard contract by the studio and left school for Hollywood in 1941, with her sister accompanying her. MGM's first order of business was to provide her with a speech coach because her Carolina drawl was nearly incomprehensible to them, and Harriet Lee as her singing teacher. After 5 years of bit parts, mostly at MGM, and many of them uncredited, Ava came to prominence in the Mark Hellinger production The Killers, playing the femme fatale Kitty Collins in 1946. It was in this role that she proved Louis B. Mayer very wrong in his opinion that she couldn't sing, act, or talk. In The Killers, she did all three, and, in a situation that would become rare for Ava, was not overdubbed on the final cut of the film's soundtrack, as her own singing voice was not only perfectly acceptable, but also extremely beautiful. Ava would be allowed to sing in her own voice again in Pandora and the Flying Dutchman and Lone Star, but had her vocals dubbed over in The Hucksters, One Touch of Venus, and Showboat, though her original vocals would remain on the original soundtrack album for Showboat, on the premise that her name would lend drawing power to the record sales. Soon after Ava arrived in Los Angeles, she met fellow MGM contract player Mickey Rooney, and the two married on January 10, 1942. The ceremony was held in the remote town of Ballard, California, because studio head Louis B. Mayer was worried that fans would desert Rooney's Andy Hardy movie series if it became known that their star was married. Ava divorced Rooney in 1943, citing mental cruelty, privately blaming his gambling and womanizing. But she didn't ruin his on-screen image as the clean-cut judge's son Andy Hardy that the public adored. Ava's second marriage was equally brief, to jazz musician and bandleader Artie Shaw from 1945 to 1946. Shaw was emotionally abusive and treated Ava abysmally, trying to turn her into an intellectual of equal caliber to himself. Perversely, this abusive behavior just endeared Ava to him further. She would later comment on their divorce in her book, Ava, My Story. Still in all, Artie was one of the deep hurts of my life. I was so in love with the man. I adored and worshipped him. And I don't think he ever really understood the damage he did by putting me down all the time. Yet, Artie and I remained close for years, and I can't say anything against him. He taught me to study, to think, to read. Of my 3 husbands, I had the most admiration for Artie. He's impossible to live with, sometimes even to be friends with, but he is a worthwhile human being, an extraordinary man. Ava's third and last marriage was to singer and actor Frank Sinatra from 1948 to 1957. She later said in her autobiography that Frank was the love of her life. Sinatra had left his wife Nancy for Ava, and their marriage made headlines, despite the fact that Frank and Nancy had already been estranged for some time. Frank was blasted by gossip columnists Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons, the Hollywood establishment, the Catholic Church, and by his fans for leaving his wife. Ava used her considerable influence, particularly with Harry Cohn, to get Frank cast in his Oscar-winning role in From Here to Eternity. This role and the award revitalized both Sinatra's acting and singing careers. The Gardner-Sinatra marriage was tumultuous. According to JohnstonCountyNC.org, Ava said of their marriage, "Both Frank and I were high-strung people, possessive and jealous and liable to explode fast. When I lose my temper, honey, you can't find it anyplace. I've just got to let off steam, and he's the same way." Pressure mounted from press attention. While Ava's star was rising, Frank's was setting, and he was struggling with the weight of his sinking career. Though Ava wrote that they never fought about their careers, only romantic jealousies and accusations, it was another sort of jealousy that ate into our bones. During their marriage, Ava became pregnant twice, but aborted both pregnancies, despite claiming to Roddy McDowall in 1968 that Frank had thrown her down the stairs and caused a miscarriage while filming The Ballad of Tam Lin. This proved to be a falsehood. She explained in her autobiography, which was published after her death, MGM had all sorts of penalty clauses about their stars having babies. Ava filed for divorce from Frank in 1954, and the divorce was finalized in 1957. Following their divorce, Ava and Frank remained good friends for the rest of her life. As friends, they got along better than they ever had as a married couple, and the two were almost like guardian angels for one another, with Ava calling Frank on the phone and chatting with him for hours every single night for the remainder of her life. During these conversations, she would often ask him for career advice, though it is documented that Frank's advice was not always the best. Ava's most notable films from 1947 to 1959 include The Hucksters, Showboat, The Snows of Kilimanjaro, Lone Star, Magambo, The Barefoot Contessa, Bawani Junction, The Sun Also Rises, and On the Beach. In 1960, Ava played the role of Soledad in The Angel Wore Red, with Dirk Bogarde as her leading man. 3 years later, she was billed between Charlton Heston and David Niven for 55 Days at Peking, which was set in China during the Boxer Rebellion in 1900. The following year, she played Maxine Falk, alongside Richard Burton and Deborah Kerr, in the critically acclaimed The Night of the Iguana, based upon a Tennessee Williams play. For this role, she was nominated for a Golden Globe Award for Best Actress in a Motion Picture Drama, and a BAFTA Award for Best Actress in a Leading Role for her performance. She next appeared again with Burt Lancaster, her co-star from The Killers, this time with Kirk Douglas and Frederick March, in 7 Days in May, a thriller about an attempted military takeover of the U.S. government. Ava played a former love interest of Lancaster's who could have been instrumental in Douglas preventing a coup against the President of the United States. Later that year, John Huston chose Ava for the part of Sarah, the wife of Abraham, played by George C. Scott, in the Dino De Laurentiis film The Bible in the Beginning, which was released in 1966. In a 1964 interview, she talked about why she accepted the role. John Huston had more faith in me than I did in myself. Now I'm glad I listened, for it is a challenging role and a very demanding one. I start out as a young wife and age through various periods, forcing me to adjust psychologically to each age. It is a complete departure for me, and most intriguing. In this role, I must create a character, not just play one. In 1968, Ava moved to London, undergoing an elective hysterectomy to allay her worries of contracting the uterine cancer that had claimed the life of her mother. That year, she appeared in Meyerling, in which she played the supporting role of Austrian Empress Elizabeth, with James Mason as Emperor Franz Joseph I. Ava lived her last 35 years of life outside of the United States. She first visited Spain during the filming of Pandora and the Flying Dutchman in 1950, and moved to that country in 1955, living there until 1968 when she moved to London. Throughout the 1970s, Ava appeared in disaster films, notably Earthquake with Charlton Heston, The Cassandra Crossing with Burt Lancaster, and the Canadian movie City on Fire. She appeared briefly as Lily Langtry at the end of The Life and Times of Judge Roy Bean in 1972 and The Bluebird in 1976. Her last movie was Regina Roma in 1982. In the 1980s, she acted primarily on television, including the miniseries remake of The Long Hot Summer, and in a story arc on Knots Landing, both in 1985. Although Ava was exposed to Christianity throughout her early years, she was an atheist later in life. Religion never played a positive role in her life, according to biographers and Ava, in her autobiography, Ava, My Story. Her friend Zoe Salas, who met her on the set of The Bible in the Beginning, when Ava was living with John Huston in Puerto Vallarta, said she always seemed unconcerned about religion. When Salas asked her about religion once, Ava replied, "It doesn't exist." Another factor that contributed to this was the death of Ava's father in her youth. Nobody wanted to know Daddy when he was dying. He was so alone. He was scared. I could see the fear in his eyes when he was smiling. I went to the preacher, the guy who'd baptized me. I begged him to come and visit Daddy, just to talk to him, give him a blessing or something. But he never did. He never came. I had no time for religion after that. I never prayed. I never said another prayer. Concerning politics, Ava was a lifelong Democrat and supported Adlai Stevenson II in the 1952 United States presidential election. Ava was a staunch supporter of civil rights for African Americans throughout her life. As a child growing up in North Carolina, she would often sit with African American children in segregated parts of movie theaters. Her personal assistant, Renee Jordan, was African American, and Gardner would often take her to clubs that were for whites only. She supported Henry A. Wallace of the Progressive Party, whose campaign in 1948 for the presidential election sought racial equality and desegregation. She became a member of the NAACP in August 1968. A bout of pneumonia and a lifetime of smoking, coupled with her underlying condition of lupus, brought on a stroke in 1986 that left Ava partially paralyzed. Although she could afford her medical expenses, Frank Sinatra wanted to pay for her visit to a specialist in the United States, and she allowed him to make the arrangements for a medically staffed private plane. She died on January 25, 1990, at the age of 68, of pneumonia and fibrosing alveolitis at her London home in 34 Ennismore Gardens. Gregory Peck had remained one of Ava's closest friends after having worked with her in 3 films. Their friendship lasted for the rest of Ava's life, and upon her death in 1990, Greg took in both her housekeeper and her dog. Ava was buried on January 29th in Sunset Memorial Park in Smithfield, North Carolina, next to her siblings and her parents, Jonas and Mary Gardner. In 1996, Ava's friend Roddy McDowall shared his memories of Ava from his experiences while directing her in The Ballad of Tam Lin for the introduction to the film on VHS. McDowall remembered, "Ava Gardner never had one moment's confidence in her performing abilities. She was a completely intuitive talent and responded in direct relation to her trust in the director at hand. Her immense lack of self-confidence triggered a variety of protective reactions, many of which were detrimental to her success as a performer and to her well-being as a woman. This bottomless lack of confidence plagued her throughout her entire career and caused her no end of woe. She was an amazing force. There was no aspect of her physical appearance that was in flaw. She seemed to have ideal proportions, and her designers never had to compensate for imperfections in her physique or bearing. Irene Sheriff, one of the greatest of costume designers, always claimed that Ava Gardner was the ultimate perfection of beauty. Well, certainly she was. Tall, broad-shouldered, when action was called, she carried herself with feline grace and the dignity of an empress. Her speaking voice was smoky, her laughter bordered on the lusty, and her features were in unnervingly perfect balance, all of which contributed to her being one of the great occasions of her time. She was simply the definition of the word breathtaking, but she had no emotional resources to deal with the fact of it. It was almost as if she was estranged from her own beauty, and was as amazed as anyone by the awesome effect she had on those around her. If you told her she was beautiful, she would literally start to shake with displacement. In her performances, ultimately, she is heartbreaking, possessed with an incomparable world-weariness, compassion, innocence, and vulnerability, colored by a streak of smoldering danger. Ava was a creature of grappled loyalties and tumultuous self-doubts. She was a very rare experience at every turn.